Tonight we're going to have a conversation, start out with a conversation between our founder, CEO David Theroux, whom I hope most of you know, and our executive director, Graham Walker, who has joined us just within the last year. But they both bring wonderful viewpoint, and they're going to talk a little bit about vision for the future and what Independent will be doing. Once they've been talking for a bit, we're very grateful to have our Research Fellow in Education with us tonight, Vicki Alger, whose book. So Vicki joins us from Arizona. As most of you may know, Independent's different from most so-called think tanks, which term we're not crazy about, because not all thinking takes place within tanks. But we're different in that we don't generally house fellows. We do house several, and we have many of them with us tonight. But most of our fellows are scattered across the country, or indeed across the globe, engaged in the work that they do. And we will approach them to work with us in their area of expertise. And we're very grateful that Vicki has joined us in last many years on education. Her big failure is a brilliant dissection of the purpose and result of the forming of the Department of Education. And importantly, as discussed last night, Independent is very much a solutions-oriented organization. So we not only say what the problem is, but we have to offer, well, what's the alternative, opportunity-based alternative based on unleashing human ingenuity and employing the virtues and the free market system. So Vicki's done a wonderful job of that in her book, Failure. We're very excited that she's now turning her attention. She was instrumental in the passage into educational savings accounts in Arizona and has worked with other states in extending parental choice there. And we're very excited about the work she's now doing with us to set an example here in California. She did a policy study for us called Customized Learning in California about implementing educational savings accounts here. And as goes California, so goes the nation. We have high hopes that we're going to set a great example here that will lead the country in freeing children from being assigned to a school that is not educating them. Without further ado, I'll let the talkers do the talking. Salads will be served, and we do invite you to enjoy the salads as they have their fireside chat, and we'll be back later. Thank you.
Well, gee, after that introduction of Vicki Alger, I just want to hear her, not us, David. What do you say to that?
That's true.
But nevertheless, we've had some exciting times recently. Last night was remarkable. David, how did you get Jordan Peterson to come and speak for the Independent Institute?
Well, I first was in contact with his daughter, Michaela, in Toronto, maybe almost a year and a half ago. And at the time, this was when he was just in an ascendant status as far as the sales of his book and the interest that he was having on the internet and in venues and so forth. And she was handling all of that herself. And I've mentioned to some of the people here that she's married, she actually got pregnant, and the avalanche of inquiries and requests just became so gigantic, they ended up contracting with a professional venue firm that would open his opportunities to speak at these gigantic venues. So then we had to shift to that firm, and that made it more complicated for us.
But David is very persuasive.
So anyway, we worked it out, and there were some hoops we had to get through, and we got to know him, and we're just very pleased that it worked out and that people really enjoyed it.
People flocked to him. I mean, we had, 550 some people there last night?
Yes.
Barely any empty seats in the house last night. And of course, he has a huge following, especially among millennial age people. Mm-hmm. Why do you think millennials are so attracted to his message?
I think that Jordan is sort of reconnecting the dots for a lot of people about the nature, sort of fundamental, eternal virtues and wisdom that has been sadly lacking in the public square, especially for young people who have gone through the educational system and in the popular culture, have basically been taught that there's no truth, there's no good and evil, moral relativism, the whole identity politics problem, and so on. And so they just don't have a perspective. And so part of the appeal is simply his providing common sense and guidance, not just in a sort of a self-help way, but grounded in ancient traditions and in cutting-edge science.
It was fascinating to hear him talk about just the way people can put their lives back together and even achieve success, but starting with simple things like telling the truth.
Telling the truth, cleaning up your room, and so forth. And these are things that mothers and grandmothers used to teach us, but in the contemporary culture, which could be called postmodern in the public square, there is this vast confusion. I mean, it's kind of incoherent in that you say, well, what is true is that there is no truth. Of course, by saying that, you make a contradiction, because anything you state, you're claiming is true. Anyway, the point is that, as National Review said, he's the right person at the right time. The New York Times has called him the most influential public figure in the world in at least a generation. Mm-hmm. The Guardian, the left-wing Guardian, has had similar things, as has the Wall Street Journal. So I think that the consensus is that he is speaking truisms, and he is, I think, properly viewed as genuine and earnest and someone who can be trusted and certainly worth listening to.
Certainly from the point of view of millennial age people, there's such a sense of a void in which they live and think. No sense of like meaning and the clarity of moral principle. And he speaks to that so powerfully. And as regards some of our more obvious concerns at the Independent Institute, I was struck by the part last night when he commented at length about how transactions in the marketplace, which are the basis of business activity and income and prosperity and so forth, all depend on the ability to trust. Right. And that when you have a society where people, generally speaking and for the most part, do what they say they're going to do and are not routinely corrupt and lying, then that reduces transaction costs, I think he said, and lays the groundwork for real prosperity, which just shows that market prosperity really sits on a foundation of ethics.
Right. No, I think that's true, and I think that's part of his appeal and his insights. And this is an old idea. It comes from the Greco-Roman tradition. It comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition. And America's founders were well versed in this, that character and virtue are fundamental, and that there's a moral reality to our lives. And if you try to essentially deny that, you are on a road to ruin. And so his book, The 12 Rules for Life, the subtitle is called An Antidote to Chaos, because his point is that if you follow sort of the Nietzschean proclamation that God is dead, and Nietzsche correctly said that would mean that everything goes. And the 20th century is full of that, the horrors of anything goes. So to have a society that's functioning, that is worth participating in, and since we are relational beings, meaning that everyone seeks to love and be loved, the relations that we have with people are based on trust, and trust means that you are subscribing to sort of a higher calling that you're subject to of moral behavior. And so it's true in a business firm, it's true in a family, it's true in a marriage, it's true in this room. There is, and in fact, during the Q&A session in our reception, Jordan was pointing out that this room of 150 or so people, it's axiomatic without even thinking about it, that everyone subscribes to this trusting ethic that we're not going to be killing each other, we're not going to be fighting, we're here, we have a common agreement, essentially, even if it's just simply implicit, that we're going to respect each other and we're going to be held accountable if we misbehave.
He's a great champion, of course, of individual liberty. He seemed, I think, as I recall, to have initially come to the public eye by his resistance in Ontario, Canada, to proposed legislation which would have allowed the police to punish you if you didn't use the proper gender pronouns for persons who were changing their pronouns. And he thought that was a great violation of freedom of speech and so forth. Very powerful position that he held, and of course controversial. And yet, how can it be that non-compelled speech, free speech by individuals, could become controversial? We live in a very strange moment culturally.
That's true. And of course, if you believe that morality is situational or relative, you can embrace almost anything. And he was confronting that, as you said, Graham, that he was objecting to the idea of compelled speech. And so he became this champion, properly so, of standing up to the Ontario provincial government that he was not going to consent to being forced to accept compelled speech. And he testified and was in the media and stood his ground both in the public square and at the university. And so he's been something of a example of the importance of free speech. In fact, he has stated that the idea of free speech is fundamental to not just a free society, but to the very ideas of Western civilization itself. It's the fundamental of our having independent minds that have integrity and that we are essentially humankind because we seek explanations, and explanations means that we're using words to express ideas, and if that is controlled, that essentially dehumanizes people and destroys even the idea of civilization itself.
When I was listening to him last night, I was thinking of something I saw at the Jefferson Memorial in Washington a couple of years ago. I was walking around. It's the one that's a big, looks like the Pantheon in Rome, near all the cherry trees are. And inscribed inside of the Jefferson Memorial is a famous saying of his. I brought it with me. Jefferson said, God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? And so he talked about some principles from the book of Genesis last night in his defense of liberty and so forth. All of this is relevant to what we do here in that I'm here working with David and Mary and others and our trustees, board members, because Independent Institute has carved out this unique role of being an organization that affirms a set of principles to protect liberty of individuals, liberty of free exchange, but also to recognize that liberty and the prosperity that arises from free market exchange depends upon, like Jordan Peterson was saying, and like Thomas Jefferson is saying, the idea that liberty is valuable because it comes from a deeper source and because we stand on ethical principles. So I admire what you have accomplished over the past, 33 and a half years now, David, if I've got the counting right. You've built an organization and a track record of publishing materials which address all sorts of concrete issues, but they do so in a way that makes the Independent Institute rather distinct, because pretty much everything I've ever seen that you published, whether it be in healthcare, education, defense and foreign policy issues, entrepreneurship and innovation, there's always a way that you attend to the ethical dimension rather than simply cost-benefit analysis. You don't simply advocate for self-interest, you advocate for the common good through the use of freedom. How did you pull together this remarkable combination of attention to human liberty and also the ethical part of it that is part and parcel of it?
Well, there are something over 1,800 think tanks in the United States. As Mary was saying, we are classified as one, but we're ranked up in the top 50, I think, something like that. So the idea of independent was to be a scholarly organization through which all of our work has to pass peer review, but we're interested in first principles, which are essentially principles that have been discovered or brought to understanding in economics and in ethics. And so you can learn how to build an atomic bomb or light a fire or build a building, but it doesn't mean that you can use that to harm other people. And so all questions of human behavior ultimately are moral questions. And the cost-benefit is intrinsic to every choice we make. But ultimately, our choices are moral questions.
Yeah.
And America's founders understood that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's our mission statement is to boldly advance peaceful, prosperous, and free societies grounded in a commitment to human worth and dignity. And that is a short way to explain the mission of trying to create a culture that will support a free society.
Right. It's not just like doing what you want to do. It's that you stand in relationship to other people on an ethical basis, and together you make free choices and produce prosperity.
Right. And I think that is what is a major reason why Peterson is popular, especially among young people, because they've been miseducated into believing that either anything goes or there's no point to anything. And so they themselves are seeking meaning and connections and relations, and it simply does not address the questions they have, which of course are themselves related to the practical aspects of their lives, whether it's housing or healthcare or whatever it might be. But the key is, how do we live lives which have meaning and purpose and achieve things in a way that we can be proud and have essentially an impact that will resonate with other people in a positive way. So it's not just what anything goes, getting back to the sort of Nietzschean conclusion of that there's no objective standard. And so I think that it's good news that millennials and others who are sort of adrift in this sort of cultural nihilism are flocking to someone like Jordan Peterson and there are others. I think that's good news. And that shows that what he's saying does resonate with people, and that is why we had him speak.
You know, it's interesting when I, as a newcomer, look at the work of the Independent Institute. This is the foundation, this combination of an ethical vision and clarity about prosperity and freedom and public policy. But what you don't typically do is you don't simply run morality seminars. We address public policy issues. For example, you've created this remarkable journal, the Independent Review, Journal of Political Economy. It has a real academic standing. It's taken seriously by economists and many other people in many other disciplines. It always addresses, concrete topics, and it does so in a way, however, that takes into account this bigger picture. I mean, almost like Adam Smith. Adam Smith is thought of as, the first great classical economist. Probably that's true. But Adam Smith based his whole economic vision on a vision of an understanding of where human moral sentiments come from. He's almost as if Adam Smith was a natural law advocate, although he didn't use the term. And you seem to have a similar vision to Adam Smith, but in the modern age.
Right. I mean, I think the key is that if you're going to communicate with anyone, you should, and be effective, you have to respect where they come from. You have to be sensitive to the questions that they have and the issues and the perspectives that they raise. They're trying to get through their life in ways that will be productive and uplifting. And so our concern was that most think tanks and, quite frankly, much of the academic world doesn't really pay attention to quality peer-reviewed work. So much of it's politicized. Mm-hmm. So much of it is siloed into self-reinforcing error, quite frankly. And so we wanted to have a program that would respect people and other perspectives, but address it squarely on their own terms. And so that was the approach that we've used. And, it stands to reason if you want to be taken seriously, the last thing you want to do is to attack people and to belittle them. That's not a very effective marketing strategy.
So, okay, one of the ways in which Independent Institute addresses concrete policy issues, with a moral angle is in the area of education, and quite a track record of achievement here. So at this point, let me welcome Dr. Vicki Alger, about whom you heard previously, to join us up here and talk about some of her work, which exemplifies the mission of the Independent Institute. Welcome, Dr. Alger. So what are you working on now, and how does it fit this vision we've been talking about?
Well, one thing that I'm sure we all know, there's no shortage of people who say, this is bad. We should get rid of this. We should get rid of that. You have to have both sides of the coin. There's lots of things, and we can get into details with the U.S. Department of Education for sure, about we need to get rid of this, but you also need a positive vision.
Oh, but speaking of Department of Education, may I interrupt you briefly? Isn't this a notable anniversary of something?
It is, and Graham, I'm actually, I was expecting, from the airport in Oakland to see the preparations for tomorrow, because we all know what tomorrow is.
I can hardly wait. What is it again?
It's a huge celebration. You think May Day is a big deal. Tomorrow was the 39th anniversary of the operations of the U.S. Department of Education. So I'm very surprised that in this part of California where parades are legendary, that we don't have parades being formed. So
how many years is it?
39.
39 years of successfully improving American education. That's amazing.
I'd call it, the federal government's, midlife crisis when it comes to education.
Okay, so I interrupted you for that little bit of facetious talk.
But it's absolutely important. But I think when we're going to talk about policy, we have to point out what isn't working. But that's not enough. And this is where I think the Independent Institute distinguishes itself, is that, okay, we can see that this is wrong, but we need to have a positive vision forward. And that's why I think the focus on education savings accounts really is such a positive way forward. There are so many aspects of parental choice in education. By the way, you're very rarely going to hear me talk about school choice, because it's much bigger than that. When we talk about education, this is a parents' rights issue. This is a core civil rights issue. So I talk about parental rights in education, and not just where their children are educated, but how our children are educated are not up to any elected official, appointed bureaucrat, or I'll bet if we raised our hands and took a poll right now, we would likely have some very differing preferences and views on what education actually is. And some fun facts about what the Federal Department of Education and the federal government generally defines as an education program, but we'll get into that later. So that's why it's not just, I think most of us would agree that we need to get rid of the U.S. Department of Education. We can do it, but we also need a positive vision of, okay, we don't have this, what do we have?
Right, exactly. And so the thing is that, people might say, well, what's an ESA? That's a question I'd like you to answer, but the context for the question is that Dr. Alger published a previous book, Misedukation, which David Theroux alluded to previously, or Mary did, and now we framed up, and she has envisioned an ongoing research project that could be a real huge impact in California, a project for educational choice in California with ESAs. Explain to our friends here why this isn't just a matter for education policy geeks.
Oh no, if you care about real education and not indoctrination, education savings accounts are something we should all get behind. And what I like about it, particularly for California, and I'm really looking forward to talking with actual Californians about this, because the way it looks in Arizona, which my home state, which was the first state to enact them back in 2011, I actually wouldn't recommend enacting them the way we did for California. I think we can have a really much more powerful vision and much more powerful impact.
What's an ESA?
Okay, an ESA is very simply, we all remember health savings accounts, correct?
HSAs.
HSAs.
Okay.
It's a similar concept, except with education. And the way it works in most states is that parents who do not prefer a government or public school education for their children simply sign a contract, and the state deposits at least 90% of the state formula funding, not the federal funding, not the local special funding, just the state formula funding, into a designated education savings account for that child. The parents receive a type of dedicated use debit card. Anyone who's been in the military and has done traveling, it's a similar concept. It's a dedicated use debit card. So you can't go out in a spending spree and just, let's go shopping after Katrina, let's get designer handbags on the taxpayer dime. No. It's designed specifically not to have that happen. The state will deposit, for easy math, let's say a child is going to get $8,000 a year. That's their state, what their district would have gotten. So their parents get $2,000 on the card. And they spend it on approved expenses and services. So you want to go to a private school, that's fine. I have a special needs child, I need tutoring. I need special tutors. I need some specialized tutors because my child does well in math, but not so much in reading. So parents basically pick and choose and customize their children's education with, let's face it, their child's education funding.
Well, shouldn't the specialized education bureaucrats be making those decisions? Because they have the expertise.
Yes, and we've been hearing those arguments since the 60s, and by the 60s, I mean the 1860s. Do you want to know what the test scores look like? Here are the test scores since the late 60s up until now.
19 or 18?
Well, we only have really official ones
19.
since the 1960s. Guess what the spending looks like? Oh, I know this isn't tough.
It goes up.
Exactly. So California is spending, well over $16,000 per regular education student. By the way, if you want to talk about special education, California is in its own category. Most states, you just double it. California, it's 2.5 times. So, yeah.
And what did the test scores do during that same time? Did they go up too?
No, they don't. Ironically, there's no direct proportional comparison between money spent and test scores. In fact, California is actually in the bottom quartile of states in terms of achievement. And don't be fooled by this, our students are too hard to educate. We have poor kids. We have children who aren't native English speakers. Well, guess what? Your next door neighbor has the same thing and worse. And we actually lead the country in terms of growth, in terms of low-income, non-native speaking children, Hispanic, and also African-American children. And guess what? We don't spend over $16,000 per child.
Well, folks are getting hungry here, so we'll bring it to a close with, in a moment, maybe some questions from the group. But why is the moment primed for ESAs in California? What's changed?
I think a couple of things have changed, and it's something that, first, is not a good thing. The federal government, under Obama, with Common Core, and as a follow-on to Common Core, California's sex education mandates. By the way, parents can't opt. This isn't like a sex ed class where I'm going to opt my child out of, here's how you use this, that, or the other thing. Parents have to keep their kids in very politicized courses. So if you have orthodox or more traditional beliefs about the family, you cannot keep your kids in district public schools these days. So I think the government overreach has gone too far. We talk about implosion. It's starting to implode, and people who would have never considered parental choice in education and are now saying, where do I sign up? Because it's not just about a moving van anymore.
Right, it's become more alarming to them.
It's alarming. Again, it's not where your child is educated, it's how your child is educated.
So what else has changed?
What else has changed is let's look at the how much we're spending. You can't continue to throw money because it's and all the strikes. It's one of these, the perfect storm of perverse financial incentives. Teachers, by the way, you can already look up and see exactly how much teachers are making, and they're making more than the average person, certainly in California and the country. And we're not seeing better results. It's going to administration. It's all being divided among the select few who really don't have folks who do not have any, impact positively on student learning.
What about the Janice decision, finally?
The Janice decision. This is very important. As we know, it's in June, it will be the 1-year anniversary of the Janice decision, which is so important because the Supreme Court ruled that no employees can be forced to contribute parts of their paycheck without their express permission. What the unions, including teachers' unions, had argued is that, I love how they appropriate economic language, complete monopolists appropriate economic language. They said people who choose not to be members are still benefiting from our services, so we don't want them to be free riders, so they have to pay an agency fee. That's over. Now, the California Teachers Association, which, by the way, is one of the biggest, scariest organizations in the United States of America, they and the Chicago Teachers Union, they have been planning for this. They knew this decision was coming. However, all the attempted end runs aren't going to work. So it's going to take, I know we're all chomping at the bit, no more CTA. We can actually have a free market in education. It does take some time. So I would give it, we're going to start seeing effects in the next year, certainly after year 3. We've seen this before, for example, in Utah and other states that said, no, we're not going to just confiscate your money. You have to agree to union dues. Mm-hmm. It takes at least 3 years.
So that decision is really reducing the resistance to this kind of change.
It will, and it's going to have a ripple effect because if the teachers' unions and affiliated unions, it's the school boards and other unions too, aren't as powerful, they're not going to have a distorted voice in Sacramento. Politicians are not going to listen to them. And I don't want to focus this battle just on Sacramento, by the way. This is at our local school boards, our local PTAs, even writing letters to our local, letters to the editor to our local papers, because so many times our journalists just get it wrong. They're not necessarily ill-intentioned, they just get it wrong.
Well, so why don't we turn the corner now?
Can I interject one thing?
Yeah, please.
There's also the setting of the views that Hispanics, African Americans may have about having parental choice. Isn't there some significant trends in California that will also feed into this?
Absolutely. In fact, right now, if you look at national polling, and I mean credible national polling, not a flash poll that CNN or some other outlet has done very quickly, very credible, nationally representative polling that drills down to state what's representative in the states, what we find is overwhelmingly African American families, Hispanic and Latino families, low-income families, and actually, if you look across the political spectrum, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, a Republican, independent. Millennials, by the way, are through the roof in terms of we want choice, and it makes sense because you have choice. How many coffee shops, Mary, did we pass coming just from the Institute up here with all the permutations? Yet, I'm sorry, you can get one type of education within your zip code. It doesn't make any sense, and millennials aren't having it. Neither are low income and people of color, disadvantaged families.
Do you remember some of the numbers as far as
the numbers? I think African Americans, it's over 70%.
70% of African Americans polled support
choice, specifically ESAs.
Wow.
Because let's face it, it's your money. We're paying taxes. And even if for low-income people, would you prefer government bureaucrats direct those programs or philanthropies and donors direct these programs?
Are there numbers for Hispanic citizens?
Hispanics, it's over 2/3, approaching 3/4.
Wow.
No, this is not even a question of, it's only a little bit of a majority. Actually, do you want to know it's majorities across the board, no matter how you slice it and dice it demographically. You know where the lowest support is? Older white people who are wealthier.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Strange.
It is strange.
Okay, so we should probably pause now and see. We've been talking about school choice, liberty, the ethical foundations of a free society, the way Independent Institute stands out, in the research think tank field. There may be questions, comments, things you'd like to say or ask. Well, we have our expert, Dr. Alger, here on education or other matters. And we have some roving microphones, I think. So we will let you, here's our roving mic. And if you have a question, grab the person with the mic. Okay, there's one back there.
Yeah, you got it. Vicki, we all know about climate change, in quotes, and how that's affected curriculum, how kids are demonstrating on Fridays. Could you talk a little bit about how that came about? Because this is an indoctrination of kids. And do you see that other curriculum, control functions are operating to work against the liberty agenda?
And I think that's an excellent question. I can't speak to I'll leave it to other experts to talk to the particulars of how the climate change agenda, came into the curriculum. I will say, not to date myself, I remember being in first grade in public schools, and it was global cooling, and that's what killed the dinosaurs. And I was so afraid. I used to put sweaters on my golden retriever every winter because I thought my golden retriever was going to die. But certainly, when we don't have liberty, indoctrination demands monopoly. Indoctrination cannot survive a true education marketplace. And when I say that, some people are horrified because we don't talk about education and competition and money and being productive. That's just in poor taste. Now, what I mean by education marketplace is that we all have choices. And then with that kind of liberty, we have diversity. So indoctrination cannot survive liberty, just like it can't in the political realm or any other realm, the economic realm. But I think what's happened is we have several monopolies upon monopolies, particularly in states in California. Once you get your moving van and you picked your house and you've paid between $250,000 and your $1 million surcharge because you're where the good public schools are, you're done choosing. So even in grammar school, elementary school, teachers are going to get tenure in 2 years. So you've got them trained out of the schools of ed, where all this stuff comes from, and then they're in. Good luck getting rid of a teacher in this kind of monopoly upon a monopoly upon a monopoly. So I think that's how it gets in and how it stays. And until we break up this monopoly, it's going to be a hard fight.
So this isn't just about freeing parents to make choices. It's also about freeing the education system from propaganda monopolies.
Yes,
wow.
But choice is also good for teachers, too. Mm-hmm. By the way, a lot of teachers hate this system. That's why they leave within 5 years.
I think there's another question on this side over. Did I see somebody over there?
Question over here.
This is your.
Don't all raise your hands at once.
I can see sparkles in a bunch of eyes. Here's the gentleman over here.
Yes, I understand the value of choice in everything, especially education. And $16,000 sounds like a lot of money to be spending on kids compared to even 10 years ago. But I'm still having trouble understanding how we can have much choice when private schools I know about, like Head Royce here locally, charge over $30,000 tuition. That's double. So is that a realistic choice for most of the kids? In other words, is the choice going to be effective, and can we really spread this to everyone?
That's an excellent question. That's actually one of the questions I get most often, because, and it usually comes from states like California or West Virginia, where you're in the throes of a monopoly. You have no market. You really don't have choices. So that's like asking, well, if we were to get a good cup of coffee in the gulag, and I'm going to put it that strongly, so I won't apologize for that. We want to get a good coffee in the gulag, and a good cup of coffee in the gulag is going to cost about a month's wages. That's not a real option for most people except the oligarchs. You're right. But in a free market where you have choices, the monopoly is busted. A great quality non-public education does not cost $30,000. It wouldn't even in California. The average cost of, well, even in DC, you look at a place like Sidwell Friends and some of these very, seemingly elite institutions that would probably be more on par cost-wise than right next door in California.
I understand
Arizona.
that a lot of major supporters of the education monopoly send their children to Sidwell Friends.
Oh, yes, President Obama and all these other members of Congress who, by the way, a majority of the ones who vote against choice send their children to private schools or the very Tony public schools with room for a pony and an Olympic-sized pool. The bottom line is, the reason why things cost so much, part of the reason why, is that you have a monopoly. It does not cost $30,000 to teach a child, even a special education child, to read. So once you break up that monopoly, you won't see those prices. You will also, in the interim, see the private sector, the schools, parents, private sector, also the business community step up to offer scholarships.
Okay,
Could I do an add-on to that, Vicki? Because we have so the Independent Institute has since 1990 or late 90s, we ran a program called the Independent Scholarship Fund, and we offered parents a private voucher of, at the time it was $1,500 a year for their child to go to a private school. And with that money, they were able to go to schools, and schools like our children went to Head Royce too. Schools like that are very anxious to have diversity and so on. They will offer financial aid up to a very great amount that would allow them to use our private voucher to put their children in that. And we had children participating in 300 different private schools across the East Bay counties of Alameda and Contra Costa. So schools will participate in attracting people and these are families that are very motivated, and their children are very motivated to learn, and they add to the student body, and the schools will meet you in having them be a part of their student body.
This is great conversation, and we wanted to continue around the tables. I am told that the waiters are poised nearby to bring in your entrees. I'm sure you'll be very happy about that. So please take advantage of talking to one another. Seek us out, in the course of the evening afterwards. Dr. Alger will be available all evening. And we thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Alger. Thanks for talking with us about the Independent Institute. Bon appetit.